The moment doesn't feel dramatic. There's no big decision, no deep reflection, no sense that anything important is happening. Just a clean showroom, bright lights, and a salesperson smiling while numbers appear on a screen. You're not there to buy a car. You're just looking, just curious, just seeing what's possible at your income level. Then the word appears, approved. Not shouted, not celebrated, just quietly confirmed, as if it were a natural consequence of being responsible, employed, and on time with your bills. The monthly payment looks reasonable. The term feels long enough to be painless, and the math seems simple enough not to question. This is where most people stop thinking, because approval feels like permission, and permission feels like safety. If the system says yes, if the bank says it fits, if the numbers don't look scary, then it must be fine, right? But what you're actually being approved for isn't transportation. It's a fixed monthly obligation that doesn't care how your life changes. The payment assumes nothing breaks, nothing shifts, nothing unexpected happens. It assumes fuel prices stay calm, insurance stays stable, repairs stay minor, and your income never stumbles. At this stage, no one shows you the full picture, because the full picture would slow you down. They don't show how interest quietly inflates the real cost, how depreciation starts the second you drive away, or how a manageable payment becomes a silent ceiling on every future decision. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people who regret their car don't regret the car itself. They regret realizing too late that the approval wasn't about what they could afford today, but about what they'd be forced to tolerate for years. So before we talk about brands, models, or prices, we need to ask a more important question. When a system says yes, is it approving your life or just your obligation? If this already feels familiar, stay with me. What comes next is where the math stops being friendly. Let's slow this down and do the math the way real life does it, not the way the showroom presents it. You're approved for a car priced at $38,000. Nothing exotic, nothing luxury, just a nice, reliable, modern vehicle that feels proportional to your income. You put some money down, not much, maybe $3,000, because keeping cash feels safer. That leaves $35,000 financed over 72 months at an interest rate that doesn't look alarming at first glance, around 6.5%, which the salesperson casually calls pretty good these days. Your monthly payment lands around $590. It feels fine, it fits the budget, it's less than rent, and it doesn't force you to say no to anything immediately. But the payment is only the first layer. Insurance jumps from $120 to $210 a month because newer cars cost more to insure and full coverage is non-negotiable. Fuel averages $180 a month, sometimes more, sometimes less depending on traffic and gas prices you don't control. Maintenance looks cheap at first glance until tires, brakes, alignments, and unexpected repairs start stacking quietly in the background. Suddenly, that $590 car is closer to $1,050 per month, without counting parking, registration, or the days something small goes wrong and costs hundreds at once. Over 6 years, you don't pay $38,000 for that car. You pay closer to $75,000 when you add interest, insurance premiums, fuel, maintenance, and depreciation. And at the end of it, the car is worth maybe $12,000. This is the part approval never mentions, because approval isn't about total cost, it's about monthly tolerance. And tolerance is not the same thing as affordability. And if this math feels uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means you're finally seeing the whole frame. Now, let's add the layer that changes everything. Imagine someone earning $6,500 after taxes, solid middle-class income, nothing extreme. Now, look at the fixed costs. Rent or mortgage, $2,400. Car payment, insurance, fuel, maintenance, $1,050. Health insurance and basic medical, $500. Utilities, phone, internet, $450. Groceries at normal prices, $700. Before saving, before investing, before living, $5,100 is already gone. That leaves $1,400 for everything else: clothing, repairs, unexpected bills, social life, emergencies, future goals. If you manage to save $300 a month, you're doing better than most. But now, change just one variable. Lower housing and transportation by $1,000, combined, not by earning more, but by restructuring where the money goes. That same person now saves $1,300 a month. $1,300 over 10 years, $156,000. Same job, same effort, same discipline. The difference isn't intelligence, it's structure. Here's what nobody tells you when you sign that loan. That $10,050 a month doesn't just buy transportation, it replaces the $450 you could have been investing every month. It replaces the emergency fund that never quite reaches a comfortable number. It replaces flexibility, optionality, and the ability to absorb small shocks without stress. This is why being able to afford the payment does not mean you can afford the decision. One measures whether your account survives the month. The other determines whether your future stays flexible or slowly hardens into obligation. What most people never calculate isn't the money, it's the mental load. When your fixed costs are high, your brain never fully rests, even on good months, even when nothing is technically wrong. There's always a background calculation running. If this breaks, can I handle it? If my hours drop, what happens? If one bill comes early, what gives? That constant pressure doesn't feel dramatic, it feels normal. So normal that people stop noticing it. But over time, it changes how decisions are made. You stop negotiating harder at work. You stop considering lateral moves that might pay off long term. You stop questioning bad management, toxic environments, or stagnant roles. Not because you suddenly became passive, but because your margin disappeared. Every fixed payment narrows your options, and when enough of them stack up, your life quietly reorganizes itself around survival instead of growth. This is why people with good incomes often feel strangely fragile. One unexpected repair, one delayed bonus, one medical bill, and the entire structure starts to shake. The stress isn't loud, it's draining. It consumes attention, energy, and clarity. Two people can earn the same amount and work just as hard, but the one with lower fixed obligations thinks further ahead, plans better, moves earlier. The other stays reactive, not because they're weaker, but because their margin is gone. This is why money problems rarely feel like money problems. They feel like exhaustion, like hesitation, like always being one step behind even when you're doing everything right. And once that mental tax becomes part of daily life, escaping it takes more than a raise. It takes changing the structure that created it. Now, let's run the comparison most people never stop to calculate. Imagine two people with the same income, same age, same experience, same effort, both earning $92,000 a year. The difference isn't intelligence, discipline, or ambition. It's the structure of their fixed costs. Person A chooses the newer car, longer loan, higher insurance, more expensive maintenance. Monthly payment looks manageable, but the total obligation locks in a large portion of future income. Person B chooses the simpler option, older model, shorter loan, lower insurance, lower depreciation. Nothing flashy, just functional. Month to month, the difference feels small, a few $100s here, a little more breathing room there. But zoom out. After 1 year, person B has several $1,000s more in liquidity. After 3 years, that gap becomes a safety buffer. After 5 years, it becomes leverage. One can absorb surprises without panic. The other needs everything to go right every single month. This is how fixed costs quietly decide who gets flexibility and who doesn't. Not because one person deserves more freedom, but because one structure leaves room for it. The irony is that both lifestyles look almost identical from the outside. Same job, same city, same routine. But internally, they're living in different financial realities. One person can walk away from a bad situation if needed. The other is negotiating with fear in the background of every decision. This is why fixed costs matter more than income alone. They determine not just what you can afford, but how much pressure your future has to carry. And once pressure becomes permanent, even good money stops feeling like progress. At some point, a quiet realization starts to form. You look at your routine and think, I'm not lazy, I'm not reckless, I'm not bad with money. You're working, you're consistent, you're responsible, and yet it still feels tight. Not in a dramatic way, in a constant way. You don't feel broke, you feel restricted. Every decision requires calculation. Every plan needs a backup. Every yes comes with 3 hidden no's. That's when it clicks. The issue isn't your discipline, it's your structure. Your income flows in, but your obligations are already waiting. The money has a destination before it even arrives. There's no pause, no buffer, no breathing room. And once you see that, something changes internally. You stop blaming yourself for not feeling ahead. You stop comparing your progress to people with completely different cost structures. You realize you've been playing a harder version of the same game. This is usually the moment people pause the video, not because they're bored, but because it feels personal. If this is sounding uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone. A lot of people watching right now are realizing the same thing at the same time. And if this perspective is clicking for you, take a second and subscribe, not because this video will fix everything overnight, but because understanding these hidden mechanics changes how you make decisions for decades. The real shift doesn't come from earning more. It comes from understanding what's quietly pulling you backward. And once that's visible, the next question becomes unavoidable. What actually needs to change? This is where most people make a reasonable mistake. They assume the solution must be small because the problem doesn't look dramatic. So they cut a subscription, they skip a few dinners out, they try to be more careful for a couple of months, and nothing really changes. Not because those actions are wrong, but because they're fighting symptoms, not the cause. The pressure doesn't come from one bad habit. It comes from a system where fixed costs dominate the equation. When your largest expenses are locked in, housing, transportation, insurance, taxes, and basic services, your financial flexibility collapses. At that point, discipline has limits. You can optimize groceries all you want, but if half your income is committed before the month even starts, there's no room for momentum. This is why advice like budget better feels insulting to people who are already trying. They're not ignoring the math, they're trapped inside it. And the trap is subtle. You're not drowning, you're treading water, which is more dangerous long term because treading water feels survivable, even as it slowly exhausts you. Years pass, raises arrive, life upgrades slightly, but the structure stays the same. The gap between effort and outcome never closes, and that creates something worse than stress. It creates resignation. So here's the shift that actually matters. Stop asking, how do I save more? And start asking, what is permanently consuming my money? Because freedom doesn't begin with willpower. It begins with understanding the structure you're operating inside. And once you see that structure clearly, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were mathematically predictable from the start. Here's what changes when you finally see the system clearly. You stop looking for ways to tolerate the pressure, and you start looking for ways to remove it. That doesn't mean living in deprivation. It means choosing structure over appearance. It means realizing that the $38,000 car and the $18,000 car both get you to work, but one costs you $75,000 over 6 years, while the other costs you $28,000. The $47,000 difference isn't just money, it's options, it's breathing room, it's the ability to say no when something doesn't serve you. Most people never frame the decision this way because culture teaches us to optimize for what looks good, not for what compounds quietly in the background. But once you understand the math, the choice becomes obvious. You can have the newer car and the tighter margins, or you can have the older car and the growing safety net. You can have the approval and the obligation, or you can have the clarity and the control. Both paths are valid, but only one leaves room for surprises. And here's the part that feels uncomfortable at first. Choosing the simpler option doesn't feel like progress. It feels like settling, because we've been conditioned to measure success by what we acquire, not by what we avoid. But freedom isn't built by adding more. It's built by protecting margin. And once you have margin, everything else becomes easier. You negotiate better, you move faster, you think clearer, not because you suddenly became smarter, but because the constant background pressure finally lifted. This is the choice most people never realize they're making when they sign that loan. Let's talk about what happens when someone finally restructures, not because they earned more, not because they got lucky, but because they changed what was consuming their income. Same person, same job, same city, but now housing and transportation cost $1,000 less per month. Suddenly, $12,000 more stays in their control. Year 1, that becomes an emergency fund that actually exists. Year 2, that becomes investments that start compounding. Year 3, that becomes leverage to negotiate, move, or walk away from situations that no longer serve them. The irony is that nothing about their external life looks dramatically different. They still work, they still pay bills, they still live a normal, functional life, but internally, everything shifted. They're no longer reactive, they're no longer trapped, they're no longer one surprise away from panic. And here's what nobody warns you about. Once you experience what it feels like to have margin, you can't go back. You can't unsee how much energy you were spending just managing the pressure. You can't unhear the constant background hum of financial anxiety that you thought was normal. This is why restructuring isn't about deprivation, it's about reclaiming attention. Because when your money isn't pre-committed to fixed costs, your mind stops running that constant survival calculation. You sleep better, you think clearer, you move with more confidence, not because your income changed, but because your structure did. And once structure changes, everything else follows. Better decisions, better opportunities, better outcomes. Not overnight, but consistently, quietly, inevitably. This is what financial freedom actually looks like. Not luxury, but margin. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never stop to face. Nothing about this system is accidental. You were taught to focus on income, promotions, titles, and approval, but no one explained that fixed costs quietly decide your freedom long before motivation ever matters. That's why so many intelligent, hard-working people feel exhausted, anxious, and behind, not because they failed, but because they're running a race designed to drain momentum. The moment you stop asking, how can I earn more, and start asking, what is permanently consuming my money, the entire picture shifts. Freedom doesn't begin with a windfall. It begins with understanding the structure you're operating inside. And once you see that structure clearly, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were mathematically predictable from the start. If this video helped you see your finances differently, not with shame, but with clarity, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Here, we don't sell shortcuts, hustle fantasies, or motivational noise. We break down the hidden systems, the math, and the psychological traps shaping modern financial life. So here's what happens next. The next video breaks down the exact restructuring steps, how to evaluate your fixed costs, where to cut without feeling deprived, and how to rebuild your financial structure from the ground up. Not theory, not inspiration, just the system. If you want to see that breakdown, subscribe now so you don't miss it. Because once you understand the game, you finally stop playing it blind. And that's when everything changes. I'll see you in the next one.